It's now time to move on to the next item of business, which is an urgent question, and I call Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether Neil Gray corrected the official report of 14th November 2024 at the earliest opportunity is required by the Scottish Ministerial Code.
Mr Kerr, if I might just ask you to... Can I ask you to resume? I'd be grateful if colleagues could listen to Mr Kerr. Mr Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on whether Neil Gray corrected the official report of the 14th of November 2024 at the earliest opportunity is required by the Scottish Ministerial Code in light of its response to an FOI request dated the 13th of December 2024, confirming that there were no recorded minutes or notes for some events attended by ministers, including attended by Neil Gray.
Thank you. Minister Jamie Hepburn.
The Scottish Ministerial Code requires any inaccuracy in what ministers say to Parliament to be corrected at the earliest opportunity. On the same day that this inadvertent error was the subject of opposition members' points of order, Mr Gray himself raised a point of order to acknowledge this error and wrote to the presiding officer, the members who raised the matter yesterday, business managers and any members not represented to the Bureau, and lodged copies of his correspondence with Spice.
Stephen Kerr.
Well, the whole point of this urgent question is that the FOI on the 13th of December shows that Neil Gray attended four events for which there are no recorded summaries. The Ministerial Code states that the official record should be corrected at the earliest possible opportunity. And yesterday, Neil Gray was forced to apologise for misleading Parliament about his statement on the 14th of November, claiming that the summaries of the so-called meetings that occurred at the football matches were available. But a Freedom of Information response from the 13th of December confirmed that no notes were held for various meetings that occurred at football matches, and the four that I mentioned attended by Neil Gray. This was even published in a newspaper 2 days later with a Scottish Government comment provided for the story, so there can be no doubt that Neil Gray knew months ago that he had misled Parliament. He had clearly violated the Ministerial Code. It's black and white. So does the Minister accept that this is a violation of the Ministerial Code?
Minister.
Well, let's make sure the record in this instance is accurate. Mr Gray was not forced to come and apologise. Mr Gray willingly came forward to acknowledge the inadvertent error he made. Of course, in releasing the information, he looked at the statement he made to Parliament, and in the statement he made to Parliament, he said summary notes are available and set out the topics covered during discussions at the majority of the engagements. That is factual, that is accurate. Of course, what we have now been able to recognise is that he inadvertently set out something that wasn't entirely accurate in answering a question to Mr Kerr. That's acknowledged, that's been recognised, and Mr Gray's apologised for it.
Stephen Kerr.
Neil Gray would never have come to this chamber to make a statement if we hadn't raised it as a point of order earlier in the day. And the fact is, the FOI shows that he knew months ago that he had misled this Parliament and took no steps whatsoever to correct the record. It is clear that Neil Gray has broken the Ministerial Code. This morning, John Swinney said, oh, Neil Gray was misspeaking. That's not true. Neil Gray had knowingly misled this Parliament for months and did nothing about it, despite the Ministerial Code being crystal clear that he was duty-bound to correct the record. And this shows nothing but contempt for this Parliament and for you, Presiding Officer. At a time when the NHS needs proper leadership, how can the public be expected to have any confidence in a Health Secretary who is unable to be completely honest with this Parliament and the people of Scotland that we represent? When did Neil Gray first inform the First Minister that he had misled Parliament? Will John Swinney refer this matter to the newly appointed advisers on the Ministerial Code, and if he won't refer this matter, will they use their new powers to launch an immediate investigation?
Thank you. Before I ask the Minister to respond, I will just remind all members that language that suggests that a fellow member has been deliberately untruthful is unacceptable. Challenges, of course, can be made in very many ways. Minister.
Well, in terms of leadership, let me say right now, today rather I should say, Neil Gray has been meeting with representatives of the Royal Colleges of the various medical professionals to discuss how we can continue to improve our National Health Service. That is exerting leadership in his role as Cabinet Secretary for Health. In relation to the wider questions that Mr Kerr has posed to me, I would refer him back to the last answer in assessing what was released in the FOI against what he had said to Parliament. Looking at the statement he made, he was very clear that summary notes are available and set at the topics covered during discussions at the majority of the engagements. That is correct. Then looking further at the answer he gave to Mr Kerr, he realised he had inadvertently said something that was inaccurate, and he came to this chamber, fronted that out and accepted he'd done that and apologised to the chamber.
Thank you. As I've said repeatedly, that attendance by ministers at sports events where appropriate should be supported by the government. But the issue now is about the conduct of the Cabinet Secretary, Neil Gray, and his two apologies. As the Cabinet Secretary referenced yesterday, he told Parliament in an answer to me on the 14th of November, "I will need to double-check, but I believe that officials attended all the events with me and there will be a note available on what was discussed." On what date was the veracity of Mr Gray's answers to Parliament double-checked, and how is this confirmed in civil service records?
Minister.
Well, in terms of that specific question, we'd need to revert back, of course, to Mr Bibby. But I think the fundamental point has been made. Mr Gray made this point yesterday, that in answering the question that Mr Bibby posed of him, he was clear that he would need to clarify whether or not that there was, in fact, a note at every meeting. Again, what has been released is not inconsistent with that fact either. So what we're referring to is his answer to Mr Kerr. He's accepted that he inadvertently set out something that was not the case. He's come to this chamber. He's apologised for that fact, and I think most people should accept that.
Thank you. I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Stephen Kerr mentioned the Freedom of Information request that was responded to on the 13th of December. So can the Minister tell us, was Neil Gray made aware of the initial request when it came in, the response that was going out, and the Scottish Government comment that went to a Sunday paper about that request? Because if this all happened around the 13th of December, he has sat on this information for well over a month before correcting the record to Parliament.
Absolutely.
Minister.
I would go back to my initial answer on being made aware of the inaccuracies yesterday when the points of order made. Mr Gray came back at the earliest opportunity to accept that fact and apologise to the chamber.
Thank you. That concludes the urgent question. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 16185 in the name of Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau setting out a business programme, and I call on Jamie Hepburn to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. No member has asked to speak to the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 16185 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The motion is therefore agreed. The next item of business is consideration of Parliamentary Bureau motion 16186 on committee membership, and I ask Jamie Hepburn, on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, to move the motion.
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Minister. The question on this motion will be put at decision time, and there are 8 questions to be put as a result of today's business. And can I remind members that if the amendment in the name of Natalie Dawn Innes is agreed to, the amendment in the name of Pam Duncan-Glancy will fall. And the first question is that amendment 16170.3 in the name of Natalie Dawn Innes, which seeks to amend motion 16170 in the name of Miles Briggs on delivering school environments where it is safe for pupils to learn and teachers to teach, be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed, therefore we'll move to a vote, and there will be a short suspension to allow members to access digital voting.